Good evening and welcome to Nation Building. My name is Winston Pinnock and I'm joined by Mr. Wendell Jones.
Good evening.
Wendell, how are you enjoying Jamaica?
Oh, Jamaica is fantastic. I've been having a wonderful time and the hospitality has been great.
Wonderful. And this evening on our program, we have a very special guest. We are joined today by none other than the former Prime Minister of Jamaica and current leader of the opposition, Mr. Andrew Holness. Good evening, Mr. Holness.
Good evening, Winston. Wendell, I'm glad to hear you're enjoying Jamaica.
Yes, it's been very good. From the time I arrived, the reception has been wonderful.
And before we get into talking about how wonderful Jamaica is and how Mr. Jones is enjoying it, we'd like to go to George Davis for a perspective.
Andrew Holness has been touring the country delivering a message crafted around his party's slogan of moving Jamaicans from poverty to prosperity. Holness has survived some tough internal challenges to his right to continue as opposition leader. So now that he's secure in his post in the JLP, what plan does Holness have for the Jamaican people? And what are the elements of that vision that he'll sell to the electorate as he woos their support ahead of the next election? And are the JLP under his leadership up to the task of enhancing the quality of life of Jamaicans? For Nation Building, I am George Davis.
Thank you, George. Mr. Holness, welcome to our program.
And let me welcome you to Jamaica.
Thank you. As we talk this evening, before we get into some weightier matters, we'd like for you to share with us who is really Andrew Holness. Give us a little background on your political history.
Well, you know, I started politics at a very early age, but I've always been a politician. My dad tells me that I was reading Das Kapital when I was 12. Of course, I was reading a book I didn't know what it was, but that was Marx's theory. It's surprising to him that I didn't ended up being a socialist, that I ended up joining a political party that is center-right. But that's because of my mother, who was a very practical person and who traditionally, her parents and her parents before that, always supported the Jamaica Labour Party. So I've always had a political inclination. And before I got married, when I met my wife, I said to her, I'm going to be a politician, so you have to get used to that. And at school, you know, I've always been in a position of leadership. And I guess all my classmates expected me to be in politics, but my grandmother thought I would be a pastor.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't think I'm too far. You know, I'm still preaching the gospel, and I'm still trying to win souls, and I'm still trying to help mankind.
Well, Mr. Holness, are you connecting with the people of Jamaica this time around?
I thought I've always been connecting with the people of Jamaica. I want to connect more this time around. I'm new to the political landscape, obviously. I would be the first of my generation to assume this position of leadership in the country. And so it does take some amount of transitioning. Clearly, the values that I hold and espouse may not necessarily be the values held and espoused throughout this society, because it is a society in transition. So I would be the first post-independence leader. And there is a slightly different look and outlook of that generation. Unfortunately, what has characterized this generation is a high level of apathy, withdrawal, and non-participation. And that has to change. And I think I have a duty to reignite the interest. I don't think that the interest is dead. I think that the interest just needs to be stimulated. They're looking for a different direction.
But what are you doing to capture the imagination of young Jamaicans?
Well, we have done a lot. I think we have conducted our politics quite differently. In Jamaica, there's a concept, and I'm certain it would be the same in the Bahamas, that the traditional politicians create excitement. We call it ray politics. So it's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of noise, a lot of showmanship. But sadly, not a lot of action, not a lot of results, which accounts for some of the frustration, some of the lack of participation, and the cynicism of politics. And I think this generation is not looking for that. Clearly, they want to be excited. It's the pop culture generation, so they want to see some excitement in the leadership, but they also want the leadership to be practical. They want the leadership to be solutions-oriented. They want the leadership to be smart. So what we have presented is a platform of a realistic vision and a bankable plan of action. So we've changed the nature of the politics quite a bit. So if you look at my leadership style and my projection versus what is considered to be the stereotypical leadership, we've changed that. And the results show in the polls that presently and since the last election that I have been leading in the polls in terms of popular support. It will take some time. Changing a culture that is embedded for 70 years does not change overnight. It will take some time for that to become the accepted leadership stereotype that of the smart leader who is setting realistic targets and giving solid plans and bankable solutions.
Mr. Holness, I must admit, I was quite surprised, and as a political observer, looking at a number of things going into the last general election held here in Jamaica a few years ago. You presented yourself, I thought, very well as a young leader and a part to the future. And many of us as political observers were surprised of the results. There are many who are of the view that what you alluded to earlier about this culture of, as you call it in Jamaica, ray-ray politics, that we need to transition away from it. But while you hear a lot of that talk, we haven't quite seen, and I don't know anywhere in the Caribbean where we have seen people acting at a mature level in terms of choosing their leaders. There's still a lot of emotionalism to it. Well, so my question to you specifically would be, how do you specifically address that in an election mode? Meaning, I understand your focus on transitioning the culture away from that, but you first have to win an election. So what's your strategy? What can you share with us in trying to be effective to, one, give a message of hope and point to the future, but at the same time be practical, because people...
Very profound, very profound. So one thing within the dynamics of the environment is that there's so many things happening. And there are so many moving parts, so many variables. You can't really tell which variable is having the greatest impact on the outcome. So we are focusing on a few of all the variables. Obviously, in the last election, there were some variables that you would consider to be exogenous shocks. Things that happened that were not within what we considered to be the normal run of things, which may have had a significant impact on the outcome.
Negative impact.
Significant negative impact on the outcome of the elections. But nonetheless, you're right. People, especially within the Caribbean, are very emotionally attached to their leaders. But what does that say when only 54% of your electorate voted? And that number has been declining since 1980, when we had over 80% of the electorate turn out to vote. So it means that there is an emotional detachment taking place that needs to be, as I said, reignited. And to do that, I would say you have to do the things that this generation of voters want.
Mr. Holness, politics is the art of the possible.
Yeah.
And in order to win, you need groundswell support. What is Andrew Holness doing to gain this groundswell support in Jamaica in order to win?
But you have to be strategic to gain that groundswell support. So in Jamaica, I would say the understanding of the politics is that there is a certain political base. And some people say it's divided almost evenly between the two political parties. And whichever party can mobilize their base is the party to win. And that's the traditional strategy to win an election. So we have returned to our base. And what I detect from our base is that they are very upset that they were so frustrated, so turned off, so disappointed, some would say, with the party that they didn't turn out to vote in their numbers the last time. This time, you get the sense from interacting with the base that they are turning out. So what I have done for the last 4 years is to be on the ground. I have covered Jamaica 3 times around, touching all the villages, all the districts, touring everywhere. I have been there when the people need leadership. And we have done it without blocking any roads, without burning any tires, without locking down the country. We've gotten the government to back off of some big things that they want to do without using the traditional display of political force. We have gotten the government to back off of certain tax proposals without the threat of a demonstration. That's the power of utilizing, as one minister called them, he used a term which is very disparaging, the articulate minority. And so the strategy is twofold. And you've successfully got me to tell you what my strategy is. But it's important that it is communicated that A, we keep the base. We educate the base so that the base understands that for us to get political power, we have to bring on our platform the articulate minority.
And some would look at you as a conservative, a political conservative. I don't know. And they make certain judgments about your judgment, for instance. And they talked about your first shot at being prime minister. And the fact that you called an election at what, for some people, was an inappropriate time. Let's talk about judgment in politics and whether or not you've been making the kinds of judgments that you believe that the vast majority of the Jamaican people support.
Well, the calling of an election is always a very difficult decision. And there are many variables, as I said, at play in calling the elections. I don't want to go to rehash the past, but as it has unfolded, and you can only look at what your opponents say to give credence to your actions, because just recently, a prominent government minister made a statement, as Andrew Holness predicted, that there would be some rough times ahead. And the government, present government, now faces probably even more difficult challenges and is now at the same point contemplating an election.
That is the game of politics.
Because, you see, I leveled with the Jamaican people. I mean, my record, my history is that, and you ask me, how do I strive to be different? Is that I never promised oxtail and curry-goat and manna from heaven. I didn't. I leveled with the people. And you know what is really affecting the emotions of the Jamaican people? They fell for a promise that to date has not been delivered. And the government is coming to say, I know we promised you this, but beg you a little more time now.
Interesting.
When we told them that had you accepted the reality with a bankable plan, which we presented, from a government that not just survived, but recovered to grow from the worst recession in 70 years that has hit the world economy. When oil prices were past 100, when our revenues from bauxite and tourism fell, we still managed to keep education growing, to keep the economy afloat, no banks failed, crime reduced, and when we came out of the recession, we grew. This government, for 4 years, with oil prices at 30, no global recessions, very friendly markets, has not produced a blip on the growth radar.
On
And a
that,
lot of people are now emotionally hurt and ashamed and embarrassed. And their retort is, well, the whole of them are the same. We are not the same. We leveled with you. I sought to be different and told the Jamaican people what the truth was. And said to them, in a short time, let's do these things, not stretch it out. Where I go into my constituency today and have to deal with a mother crying because she cannot afford the school fee. And she's not going out there to create a problem and to demonstrate and block the roads, because the government has created this picture that if you don't pay your school fee, you should be ashamed of yourself. But they are hurting. 4 years ago, that wasn't the case, because we put in place something called the free tuition policy. And the government attacked it, the present government, then opposition attacked it. But you know what? No schools closed.
on that passionate note,
Yes.
we're going to take a break.
Yes.
As you can see, Mr. Holness is a passionate man about the things he believes in. This is Nation Building, and we'll be right back after this break.
We're back here on Nation Building, and we are speaking this evening with the leader of the opposition in Jamaica, Mr. Holness. Mr. Holness, given the state of the Jamaican economy, and the economy has been in the doldrums for quite some time, and you talked about remittances a while ago. Given the state of the economy and your reliance on remittances for your reserves position, has Jamaica lost its leadership edge in the region?
Jamaica, by its history, by its relative size, by the fact that it is an English-speaking country, and by its participation and the amplification of its voice in international affairs, will always be a leader in the Caribbean. But the truth is that our economy is not leading. By now, the Trinidadian economy is way past us. We have underperformed, truly. And the disappointment is that we are a country of such great potential. It is not lost, and it is not impossible to recover. A lot depends on the people. And the people vote, bread and butter issues. Who will promise them the quickest route to the bread and butter? It has not always been the best route, most sustainable, and the one that has actually yielded results. In the 60s, our economy was the fastest growing economy in this region. Lee Kuan Yew from Singapore visited, saw what we were doing, commented on our culture, but complemented our strategy for industrialization. Took the strategy, paired it with a culture of hard work and frugality, and Singapore is what it is. Singapore's GDP is 50 times, not 50, 10 times what we are now. Their GDP per capita is somewhere in the region of $55,000 US. I was in somewhere in the region of $5,000 US. So,
And so you've lost your competitive edge.
we've underperformed.
Yes.
But I think we're still the leaders in the Caribbean politically, culturally, but economically, we have underperformed.
And leadership is what is necessary.
Leadership is what is necessary.
For you to rebound, isn't that right?
I think that's key. I think it has to start with a new vision of Jamaica, where people see their country as a country that is prosperous. The PNP has driven into the heads of the people of Jamaica the acceptance of poverty. It's a dangerous thing. it has created the view that since we can't all prosper and progress, then we should all be poor. So it has created a philosophy of, well, you know, we love the poor and we're going to take care of the poor. And it is a philosophy that people buy. There's nothing wrong with loving the poor, but sympathy for the poor doesn't help. You know, just merely saying, I love you, and do nothing that is going to improve the state of where you are doesn't help. And so Jamaica has suffered for a very long time from what I describe as the politics of poverty.
But it seems to me that you have a poverty of imagination as well, Mr. Holness.
Well, I
poverty
put
of
you-
imagination on the part
Not
of
me.
leaders in,
Not me.
in Jamaica.
Not me.
Because you have a growing level of poverty in this country, and I'm told that there are two classes, rich and very poor.
But you know,
hasn't the middle
I
class
want to take you back.
almost disappeared in
It
Jamaica?
has. It has. And it has because the PNP has sold this message of poverty. They have sold an idea to the average person on the street that we can divide up the small GDP that we have in a particular way to benefit a particular group.
Aren't you being disingenuous,
No,
Mr.
no,
Holness?
no, that's the truth.
So, Mr. Holness,
They've
isn't
sold this idea. If you ask what is the mantra of the PNP? The mantra of the PNP is, we love the poor.
Mr. Holness, you,
No, you know, I want to help the poor. I come from a poor background. I was born in Spanish Town, 56 Cumberland Road, just a little bit above the Grassyard Market. So I know everything about poverty. And I tell you up front, I hate poverty. I love the poor, but I hate poverty. And I don't wish that on anybody. And I don't think that Jamaica is destined to be poor. So when you talk about the poverty of imagination, I absolutely agree with you. Because do you know what the mantra of the Jamaica Labour Party is? It is to move Jamaica from poverty to prosperity. We are saying Jamaica is a prosperous country. It is a country that has great opportunities. But the Jamaican people need to shake off this almost pall of gloom that the PNP has placed over our minds and start to embrace a far more aspirational vision for the country, a far more prospecting vision for the country, a far more realistic vision for the country. And that is what we preach. And that is the message that we send. My commitment is to move Jamaica out of this thinking about being poor to start to think about prosperity.
Mr. Holness, some would say you paint a very optimistic picture, which you should, as a potential leader of the country again. But with the debt burden that Jamaica carries, with the financial state in which the country finds itself in, isn't it extremely difficult unless there is some relief or debt forgiveness of some sort in a significant way to be able to really lift the country economically from where it is?
I'm glad you asked the question because, you know, that question illustrates the fault in the thinking of the present government. If you drive through Jamaica, Jamaica has some of the best infrastructure in the Caribbean. Make no mistake about that. You know, we have good institutions. Jamaica has managed to achieve a great deal of development. But you know what? We did not achieve that development by growth.
How did it come about?
Unlike the Bahamas, where your economy has consistently registered growth, or like Trinidad. Even if it has fallen off sometimes, it picks up back. We have achieved this development by borrowing. That's how we have achieved it. And we have done this borrowing in several ways. There are three basic tools of economic management. It's either you're going to depend on monetary policy, or you're going to use fiscal policy, or you're going to use growth strategies. In the 90s, the government relied heavily on monetary policy. Created mayhem in inflation, mayhem in interest rates, and a massive slide in the dollar. And the big debate then was the independence of the central bank and ensuring that the government isn't printing money. And I think we've passed that stage, and I think our economic policy has settled on the fact that you can't use monetary policy. Where we are now is on fiscal policy. How do we manage our borrowing, our taxes, and our spending? And so the IMF has created a new era of economic thinking in Jamaica. We were the ones who heralded that in. We were the ones who invited in the IMF. Again, after P.J. Patterson said, bye-bye IMF, we had to bring back in the IMF because we faced the worst global recession. All our revenues were cut in half, and we needed the support.
Mr. Holness.
So I just wanted to complete the point, which is that Jamaica can conquer its debt problem, but it is not going to conquer its debt problem by focusing solely on the fiscal realm. That is, taxing more, spending less in an attempt to repay debt. Obama visited Jamaica, and I think the most profound message that he has delivered here, which the government should really pay attention to, he said, as it turns out, the fastest way to pay down debt is to grow really fast.
Yes.
This government has avoided growth policy. Either they don't understand it, or they're afraid of it.
Mr. Holness, we have to take a break here, but when we return, we want to talk about the difference between growth and development.
Sure.
Let's take this break here, and we'll come right back.